Alex had been planning this trip for months. His job as a high school teacher kept him busy, and every day seemed filled with endless papers to grade and lessons to prepare. But now, he was finally free. His suitcase was packed neatly, filled with clothes, a few books, and a small camera he had bought to capture memories. Alex's heart felt light as he made his way to the airport early in the morning. He loved the quiet calm of airports before the rush of travelers arrived. He checked in quickly and made his way through security without any problems. Walking through the terminal, Alex noticed the usual sounds, the rolling of luggage, announcements echoing from speakers, and the occasional laughter of families heading on vacations. He found a small cafe and bought a cup of coffee, sipping it slowly while watching planes take off through the large glass windows. The anticipation of the upcoming trip filled him with happiness. Soon, it was time to board. Alex lined up at the gate, checking his boarding pass to make sure he was in the right section. He had chosen a window seat months ago because he loved looking out at the clouds and the scenery below during flights. The window seat was his small joy, a quiet corner where he could read, think, or simply relax. Finally, the boarding announcement came. Alex stepped onto the plane, greeting the flight attendants politely. He walked down the aisle, glancing at the seats to find his row. When he arrived, he was about to slide into his window seat when a sharp voice stopped him. "I really need that window seat," said a woman standing near the aisle. Alex looked up and saw a middle-aged woman with neatly styled hair and a serious expression. "I'm sorry," Alex said gently. "This is my seat. I reserved it months ago." The woman frowned, crossing her arms. "That doesn't matter. I want the window seat. You can move." Alex blinked, surprised by her tone. He had not expected anyone to argue over a single seat. He tried to stay calm. "I understand, but the seat is assigned to me. I've had it for months. Maybe you can choose another one." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. "I don't think you understand. I really need it. You can sit elsewhere." Alex shook his head, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm sorry. I can't. This is my seat." Around them, other passengers began to notice. Some stared quietly, while others whispered to each other. The flight attendant, noticing the small crowd forming, walked over. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, smiling politely. "This man won't give me the window seat," the woman said sharply, pointing at Alex. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the flight attendant said gently. "He has already reserved this seat. We can check for other available seats, if you like." The woman huffed loudly, muttering something under her breath. Alex could feel the tension rising in the cabin. He wanted to stay calm, but his heart raced. He had never encountered someone so determined to take a seat he had already booked. As the flight attendant moved away to check the seating chart, the woman stood there for a moment, glaring at Alex. Her eyes were sharp, almost daring him to give in. Alex looked down at his hands, trying to steady them. He told himself to stay calm. It was only a short flight, and the seat was his rightfully. Finally, the flight attendant returned. "Ma'am, there is another window seat available a few rows back," she said kindly. "Would you like to take it?" The woman shook her head. "No, I want this one. I was here first." Alex frowned. "Actually, I was here first. I reserved it months ago." The cabin felt tense. Passengers were shifting in their seats, some craning their necks to watch. Alex could hear quiet whispers. He wished the woman would see reason, but she seemed determined to make the situation difficult. A man sitting nearby, named Tom, leaned over. "Hey, don't worry about her. Just sit where you booked. She'll get tired of arguing eventually," he said quietly, giving Alex a reassuring smile. Alex nodded, grateful for the support, but still nervous. The woman, however, was not giving up. She stared at him, frowning deeply. "I don't see why you should have the seat more than me," she said. "Because I booked it," Alex replied calmly. "I've been looking forward to the seat for months. I just want to enjoy the flight." The woman let out a small, frustrated sigh, and Alex could see that other passengers were beginning to notice. Some looked annoyed at the disturbance, while others seemed entertained. Alex wished he could disappear into the seat and ignore the conflict. The flight attendant tried again. "Ma'am, we really want everyone to have a pleasant flight. Please consider the other seat. It's just a few rows back." The woman paused, then shook her head again. Alex could feel his patience stretching thin, but he reminded himself to stay polite. He didn't want the situation to get worse. Finally, she muttered something about it being unfair and moved reluctantly toward the back of the plane. Alex exhaled deeply, feeling a small wave of relief. He settled into his window seat, buckling the seat belt and trying to focus on the excitement of the trip. The plane began to taxi down the runway, and Alex gazed out the window as the city became smaller and smaller. The clouds stretched across the sky like a soft, white blanket. He felt a mixture of relief and happiness. The tension of the confrontation began to fade, replaced by the joy of flight and the beauty of the view. He opened his book and tried to read, but his mind kept wandering back to the incident. Why had the woman acted so aggressively? He wondered if she had a stressful day or if this was just her personality. Either way, Alex felt proud that he had stayed calm and respectful. As the plane ascended, other passengers began to settle into their seats. Children laughed quietly, couples held hands, and a few people typed on their laptops. Alex took a deep breath, feeling the gentle hum of the plane and the soft vibration of the engines. Despite the earlier tension, the flight started to feel peaceful. The woman, Karen, sat a few rows back, occasionally glancing forward. Alex noticed her frown soften slightly as she looked out of her own window. Perhaps, he thought, she was beginning to realize that the flight was not worth the argument. Alex closed his book for a moment, resting his head against the window. The sunlight glinted off the wing of the plane, and he felt a sense of calm wash over him. He thought about the places he would visit, the photos he would take, and the memories he would make. This trip, he realized, was about more than just a window seat. It was about enjoying life, no matter the small obstacles along the way. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Alex smiled. The clouds below looked like mountains of cotton, and the sky stretched endlessly above. For a moment, he felt as if he were floating in a world separate from stress and conflicts, a place where he could simply breathe and be. He looked around the cabin, noticing the small details: the way a little girl carefully folded her drawing, the way a man sipped coffee quietly, the way flight attendants moved gracefully up and down the aisle. It was a small world, contained within the plane, but it was full of life and stories. Alex leaned back in his seat, letting the hum of the engines lull him into a peaceful state. He thought about the argument with Karen and realized that staying calm, polite, and firm had made all the difference. He had not let anger take over, and that gave him a quiet sense of victory. The flight stretched on, and Alex felt a growing sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. He knew that the trip would bring adventures, laughter, and perhaps even challenges. But he was ready. The first test, the confrontation over a window seat, had taught him patience and self-control. As he watched the clouds drift by, Alex felt a soft smile spread across his face. This was just the beginning of a journey, both in miles and in life. And even though a small argument had threatened to ruin his start, he had managed to keep his calm, enjoy the moment, and claim the seat he had chosen. The plane continued to soar above the earth, and Alex gazed out the window, feeling a mix of excitement, relief, and hope. He could already tell that this trip would be unforgettable. The plane had finally settled into cruising altitude, and Alex thought the ordeal with Karen was over. He leaned back in his window seat, enjoying the soft hum of the engines and the peaceful view outside. The sunlight glinted on the clouds, creating patterns that looked almost magical. But his sense of calm didn't last long. Karen, seated a few rows behind him, had not fully let go of her frustration. She kept glancing forward, her eyes narrowing each time she saw Alex reading his book or smiling quietly at the view. To her, it seemed unfair that he had claimed the seat without a second thought. Karen muttered to herself occasionally, shaking her head, and even though Alex could not hear her words, he could sense her presence like a shadow stretching across the cabin. Alex tried to focus on the book in his lap. He had chosen a light novel, hoping to distract himself from the earlier tension. But the quiet rustle of pages and the soft conversations around him could not drown out the feeling that Karen was still watching him. It was as if every time he moved, she became more impatient. A flight attendant, noticing Karen's occasional sighs and glances, approached her with a polite smile. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" she asked gently. Karen looked at her, her expression sharp but controlled. "Everything is fine," she said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. She returned to staring out the window, frowning slightly as she did so. The flight attendant gave her a small, understanding nod and moved on. Alex, sensing the tension, tried to remain calm. He reminded himself that he had done nothing wrong. He had reserved the seat fairly, and he had politely refused to give it up. But still, he felt a subtle anxiety creeping over him, the kind that comes from knowing someone is upset nearby. After a few minutes, Karen stood up abruptly. The sudden movement caught Alex's attention, and he looked up, startled. "I just want to stretch my legs," she said loudly, though her eyes were fixed on him. She walked down the aisle slowly, making sure Alex could see her. It felt like a challenge, and Alex's stomach tightened. He wanted to stay calm, but a part of him was irritated. The passengers nearby glanced at each other, sensing the rising tension. Some whispered quietly, while others returned to their activities, hoping not to get involved. Alex focused on his book again, but he could feel the heat of Karen's eyes like a weight pressing on him. Moments later, Karen returned to her seat, sitting with a small sigh. But she was not done. She pulled out her phone and began typing quickly, her fingers tapping in short bursts. Alex could see her occasionally glancing up at him. It was clear that she was not just frustrated but determined to make her feelings known. Alex tried to ignore it, taking a deep breath and opening his book again. The pages offered a brief escape, and for a moment, he was lost in the story. But then, Karen's voice pierced the quiet. "Excuse me," she said sharply, "why do you get to enjoy that view while I sit here?" Alex looked up, surprised. The passengers around them had turned their attention. He closed his book, trying to respond calmly. It's just my seat, ma'am. I reserved it months ago. Karen leaned back, crossing her arms. I think you're being selfish, she said. There's no reason for you to enjoy the window while I don't. Alex took a deep breath, realizing that reasoning with her might be impossible. I'm not trying to be selfish, he said quietly. I just want to enjoy the seat I booked. You can enjoy the seat you're in. It's not a competition. A man sitting in the row across the aisle, noticing the tension, decided to intervene. She's just upset, he said kindly to Alex. Don't let it bother you. You've got your seat, and that's fair. Alex nodded, grateful for the support. But Karen was not ready to let it go. She muttered something under her breath, loud enough for a few nearby passengers to hear. Unbelievable. Some people have no manners. The whispers around the cabin grew louder. People were beginning to notice, some shaking their heads, others exchanging quiet smiles at the drama unfolding. Alex felt his cheeks flush, not from embarrassment but from the growing frustration he sensed from Karen. The flight attendant returned, sensing the tension. Is everything okay now? She asked, her tone gentle. Karen shook her head, frowning. I just think this isn't fair, she said, gesturing toward Alex. Alex felt a small pang of nervousness. He wanted to say more, to explain that fairness wasn't a matter of desire but of reservation. But he also knew that arguing further would only escalate the situation. He closed his mouth and took another deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The plane continued to fly above the clouds, the sunlight streaming through the windows creating small patterns on the floor and seats. Alex looked outside, trying to focus on the beauty of the sky, but he could still feel Karen's presence like a shadow. As the flight continued, Alex began to notice other passengers observing quietly. Some were curious, while others seemed entertained by the tension. A young woman near the back whispered to her friend, nodding toward Alex and Karen. Alex caught a glimpse of their smiles, realizing that the situation was becoming more noticeable than he had imagined. Karen, noticing the attention, seemed to become even more determined. She leaned back in her seat, tapping her fingers impatiently on the armrest. Her eyes flicked to Alex every few moments, as if measuring whether he would give in or react. Alex, however, kept his composure, refusing to let the situation disturb him further. A few moments later, Karen stood up again, this time holding her phone. She spoke in a tone that was loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. I think people should know how unfair this is, she said. Alex's heart sank. He realized she might be planning to document the confrontation. He had hoped to avoid any further embarrassment, but it seemed that Karen was determined to make a scene. He remained calm, keeping his eyes on the window, refusing to engage further. The flight attendant approached, noticing Karen's stance. Ma'am, is there something we can help you with? She asked politely. Karen shook her head. No, I just want everyone to see how unfair this is, she said, her tone sharp but controlled. Alex felt a wave of anxiety but reminded himself to stay calm. He had done nothing wrong. The seat was his, and he had handled the situation politely. He focused on the clouds outside, letting their soft, white forms soothe him. The plane reached cruising altitude, and the hum of the engine seemed to fill the cabin with a gentle rhythm. Alex took deep breaths, trying to calm his mind. He realized that this flight, which had started with excitement, had turned into a test of patience and composure. Passengers continued to watch quietly, sensing the tension between Alex and Karen. Some offered small smiles or encouraging glances, while others seemed anxious, hoping the situation would resolve peacefully. Alex felt grateful for the support, even from strangers. As the minutes passed, Karen's frustration seemed to simmer, though not disappear. She stared out the window occasionally, muttering to herself, and tapping her phone. Alex continued to focus on his book, occasionally glancing out at the sky to regain his sense of calm. For Alex, the incident had become more than just a disagreement over a window seat. It was a lesson in patience, in standing firm politely, and in maintaining composure when faced with unreasonable demands. He realized that not every conflict required anger or confrontation. Sometimes, silence and dignity spoke louder than words. Despite the tension, the flight continued peacefully for the most part. The engine's hum, the occasional conversation, and the view of the clouds helped Alex maintain a sense of calm. He reminded himself that this was just a small moment in a much larger journey. Karen, after several minutes of muttering and tapping on her phone, finally leaned back in her seat with a sigh. She did not smile, but her sharpness seemed to dull slightly. Alex sensed that perhaps she was beginning to realize that the argument over the seat was not worth further conflict. Alex closed his book once again, feeling a mixture of relief and quiet satisfaction. He had handled the situation politely, firmly, and without losing his composure. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. As the flight continued, Alex began to notice the small joys around him: the laughter of a child, the gentle hum of the plane, the soft light filtering through the clouds. Despite the earlier tension, he felt a sense of peace and anticipation for the adventure that awaited him at his destination. Looking around, he noticed that the passengers were slowly returning to their routines. Conversations resumed, headphones were placed over ears, and eyes returned to books or screens. The cabin was no longer tense, and Alex felt a sense of relief wash over him. For the remainder of the flight, Alex focused on the small pleasures, the changing patterns of clouds, the sunlight reflecting off the plane, and the quiet rhythm of the journey. He reminded himself that sometimes, life presented challenges in small, unexpected ways, and the key was to navigate them with patience, dignity, and calm. By the time the plane began its descent, Alex felt a sense of quiet triumph. The conflict over the window seat, though stressful, had not ruined his trip. Instead, it had given him a lesson in composure, patience, and self-respect. As the city below began to come into view, Alex smiled softly. The journey was just beginning, and he knew that the lessons of this flight would stay with him for a long time. He had faced a challenge, stood firm politely, and emerged with his peace intact. And that, he realized, was worth more than any seat by the window. The airplane had leveled off into a steady rhythm, and Alex tried to lose himself in the comfort of the clouds outside his window. He had been reading his book and jotting down some notes for a story he hoped to write, yet a faint tension lingered in the cabin. Karen, seated a few rows behind him, still shot sharp glances forward. Her frustration seemed to have softened slightly, but Alex could tell she had not forgotten the disagreement over the window seat. He tried not to pay attention, reminding himself that he had already handled the situation politely and firmly. The first hours of the flight had taught him that some conflicts required nothing more than patience and calmness. Yet, the energy of the cabin was subtly shifting. A few passengers whispered to each other, clearly curious about the earlier confrontation. Alex noticed a young woman, Sarah, sitting 2 rows ahead, observing the scene with quiet curiosity. She had short brown hair and glasses, and her expression was kind but concerned. Occasionally, she glanced back at Alex, then toward Karen, as if weighing the situation. Alex caught her eye and gave a small nod, trying to convey that everything was okay. Karen, meanwhile, had retrieved a small notebook and pen from her bag. She scribbled furiously, occasionally looking forward at Alex, her lips pressed tightly together. It was clear she had not given up on her grievance. She muttered under her breath in soft tones, though her words carried an edge of irritation that made Alex glance up once more. Alex took a deep breath and focused on his window. He reminded himself that he could not control other people's reactions, only his own. The clouds stretched endlessly beneath him, brilliant and soft, providing a sense of calm he desperately needed. He felt the gentle vibration of the plane, the steady hum of the engines, and the occasional clink of service carts in the aisle. All of it reminded him that life moved on, regardless of minor conflicts. Suddenly, Karen spoke loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "It's unbelievable. Some people think they can just have everything their way." Alex paused, looking down at his book. He had hoped to ignore her completely, but the remark was directed squarely at him. His cheeks warmed slightly, not from embarrassment, but from the lingering tension. He reminded himself silently, "Stay calm. Do not engage." Before Karen could continue, Sarah leaned forward slightly and spoke firmly. "Excuse me," she said, her tone clear but gentle. "He has every right to be in his seat. You can't just demand it from him." Karen's eyes narrowed at Sarah. "I think you don't understand," she said sharply. "I need that seat. It's my preference, and I should get it." Sarah shook her head, unfazed by the confrontation. "It's not about preference. It's about fairness and respect. You can't take something that isn't yours, just because you want it more." A small murmur of agreement ran through the nearby passengers. Alex felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone had spoken up on his behalf, supporting him without causing additional conflict. Karen let out a small sigh and leaned back in her seat. She seemed to be weighing her options. Her gaze flickered between Alex, Sarah, and the passengers around her. Alex felt a quiet hope that she might finally relent. The flight attendant approached once more, offering a polite smile. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Karen shook her head but did not argue further. "I suppose it's fine," she said, though the word was clearly reluctant. She returned her attention to the clouds outside her window, occasionally tapping her pen against the notebook in her lap. Alex closed his book for a moment and gave a grateful nod to Sarah. "Thank you," he whispered. She smiled softly. "Don't worry. You've handled it well. She'll calm down eventually." Alex exhaled slowly, feeling the tension begin to melt away. He had been worried that Karen's determination might cause an ongoing disturbance, but the support from Sarah and other passengers had made a huge difference. Sometimes, he realized, standing firm politely was enough, especially when others recognized your fairness. As the hours passed, the cabin settled into a quiet rhythm. The occasional sound of children laughing or people typing on laptops filled the background, but the earlier tension had mostly dissipated. Karen, while still distant, had stopped muttering. She flipped through her notebook slowly, her frown less pronounced than before. Alex leaned his head against the window and allowed himself a moment of peace. The view outside was breathtaking. Clouds stretched endlessly, illuminated by the sun, and distant mountains peeked through the layers of white. He felt a sense of wonder, a reminder of why he had loved the window seat in the first place. Yet, Alex also noticed something else, the sense of connection among passengers. Small gestures of kindness had started to appear. A mother comforted her child quietly, a man offered a travel pillow to his companion, and Sarah occasionally smiled at Alex, silently encouraging him. It was a reminder that even in moments of tension, humanity could shine through. Karen, after several minutes, closed her notebook and leaned back fully in her seat. She no longer glared forward, but she did not smile either. Alex realized that perhaps she was beginning to accept the situation. Perhaps she was recognizing that some conflicts were not worth escalating further. The flight attendant moved through the cabin, offering drinks and snacks. Alex accepted a cup of water, grateful for the brief distraction. He took small sips while continuing to gaze out at the clouds. Each moment of calm allowed him to recharge emotionally, giving him the strength to continue the flight peacefully. Meanwhile, Karen seemed lost in her own thoughts. Occasionally, she glanced forward but did not speak to Alex. The energy in the cabin shifted slowly from tension to quiet observation. Passengers who had been curious now returned to their own activities, allowing Alex and Karen to coexist in relative peace. Alex took out his notebook and began to jot down thoughts inspired by the flight. The earlier confrontation, while stressful, had given him material for reflection. He wrote about patience, fairness, and the quiet strength required to remain polite under pressure. Each word helped him process the events, turning anxiety into insight. A few rows ahead, Sarah leaned back, observing Alex as he wrote. She smiled softly, clearly pleased that her support had made a difference. Alex felt a sense of gratitude toward her. In a moment of tension, a small gesture of kindness had shifted the atmosphere entirely. Time passed, and the plane moved steadily through the sky. Sunlight shifted across the cabin, casting warm patterns on the seats and floor. Alex noticed small details he had missed earlier, the way the light reflected on a silver tray, the subtle hum of the ventilation system, the gentle sway of the plane in mild turbulence. These little observations grounded him, allowing him to enjoy the journey beyond the stress of the earlier confrontation. Karen, for her part, seemed increasingly absorbed in her notebook. She scribbled notes quietly, her earlier sharpness replaced by a subdued focus. Alex realized that the argument over the window seat, which had started as a source of stress, was now fading into the background. Occasionally, Karen glanced at him, but the intensity of her gaze had diminished. Alex continued to focus on his book, his notebook, and the scenery outside. He felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had maintained composure, acted with patience, and received support from someone willing to speak up on his behalf. The remaining passengers, observing quietly, seemed relieved. The cabin no longer buzzed with tension. Conversations resumed, and laughter occasionally broke the soft hum of the plane. Alex felt a renewed sense of optimism. Even small acts of support and courage could transform a stressful situation into a learning experience. As the flight continued, Alex reflected on the events. The confrontation with Karen had been unexpected, but it had shown him the importance of standing firm politely, of seeking support when needed, and of observing the humanity in others. Sarah's intervention had reminded him that sometimes, the right words at the right time could prevent conflict and foster understanding. Karen, slowly, seemed to recognize the lesson too. Her posture relaxed, her frown softened, and the notebook in her lap suggested she had turned her energy toward reflection rather than confrontation. Alex sensed that this flight would be remembered by both of them not just for the disagreement, but for the quiet resolution that followed. The hours passed, and the plane continued to glide through the sky. Alex found peace in the rhythm of the journey, in the small kindnesses of fellow passengers, and in the beauty of the clouds below. For the first time in a long while, he felt completely present, appreciating the moment rather than worrying about conflict. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sky, Alex felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had faced a challenge, stayed true to his principles, and found an ally when needed. The window seat had been more than a place to look at clouds, it had become a symbol of composure, fairness, and quiet courage. By the time the flight reached the halfway point, the cabin was calm and peaceful. Passengers had returned to their personal routines, and Karen no longer looked in Alex's direction with irritation. Alex felt a sense of quiet triumph. Not because he had won anything, but because he had maintained dignity and patience under pressure. The flight continued smoothly, and Alex allowed himself to relax fully for the first time in hours. He gazed out the window at the endless sky, reflecting on the unexpected lessons learned. Life, he realized, often presented small challenges that tested patience, composure, and fairness. The key was to face them with calm confidence and respect for oneself and others. And as the plane soared onward, Alex felt ready for whatever lay ahead. The journey had begun not just with the anticipation of a vacation, but with a lesson in human interaction, kindness, and quiet courage. The confrontation with Karen, once a source of stress, had transformed into a moment of insight, thanks to the support of an unexpected ally. The airplane continued its smooth flight, the sunlight now beginning to soften as the afternoon edged toward evening. Alex had finally settled into a steady rhythm. His notebook lay open on his lap, filled with reflections and ideas inspired by the flight. The earlier confrontation with Karen had faded into the background, and he felt a quiet sense of relief. He had managed to maintain patience and composure, and for the first time, he could almost enjoy the flight fully. Karen, seated several rows behind him, seemed quieter than before. She had put away her notebook and phone, gazing occasionally out the window with a thoughtful expression. Yet, a subtle tension still lingered, like the quiet after a storm. Alex sensed she had not fully let go of the argument, but at least she was no longer creating a scene. However, the situation was about to take an unexpected turn. A few rows down, a young man named Jason had been watching the earlier interactions. He had discreetly recorded the small confrontation with his phone. At first, he had only intended to capture a funny moment for his friends, imagining a short clip of a disagreement over a window seat. But as he reviewed the video, he realized it was something more, a clear example of how patience and calm could prevail in a tense situation. Jason uploaded the short clip to a social media platform with a simple caption, "Man calmly defends his window seat while lady loses it. Must watch." He shared it with a few friends, expecting a handful of views. What happened next exceeded anyone's expectations. Within minutes, people began reacting to the video. Comments poured in, praising Alex for staying calm and criticizing Karen's behavior. Users shared the clip across multiple platforms, and it began to gain traction quickly. Hashtags started trending, with people calling it #WindowSeatDrama and #StayCalmWin. Alex, unaware of the sudden viral attention, continued to focus on the clouds outside his window, completely absorbed in the moment. Meanwhile, Karen noticed a few passengers quietly smiling at their phones. She glanced down at her own phone and saw the video. Her eyes widened in disbelief. People across the internet were watching her behavior, and not in a flattering way. Karen felt her face heat up, a mix of embarrassment and frustration. She muttered under her breath, clearly upset, yet unable to stop checking the comments and reactions flooding in. Alex, still unaware, continued writing in his notebook. He reflected on the irony of the situation, The confrontation had been stressful, yet it had also taught him something valuable about patience, fairness, and human kindness. He was grateful for Sarah's support earlier, realizing how a small act of courage could change the outcome of tense moments. Jason's video continued to gain popularity. People from around the country began sharing it widely, praising Alex's composure and discussing the importance of standing firm politely in small conflicts. Memes and short clips highlighting the most dramatic parts began circulating, each adding humor while reinforcing the message of calmness and fairness. As the plane cruised over mountains and rivers, Alex finally put down his notebook and leaned back, enjoying the view. He had no idea that a few minutes of tension earlier had captured the attention of thousands of people. The soft light of the late afternoon sun bathed the cabin, and he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. Karen, on the other hand, was growing increasingly uneasy. She scrolled through the comments, reading people's reactions to her behavior. Many expressed support for Alex, praising his patience and calmness. Others made jokes about the argument, comparing it to small disputes everyone had faced at some point. The realization that her behavior was being scrutinized publicly caused a deep sense of embarrassment. She closed her phone, sighing, and leaned back in her seat, clearly reflecting on her actions. Sarah, seated nearby, had noticed Karen's growing discomfort. She glanced at Alex with a small smile, feeling pleased that the situation had shifted. Alex, unaware of the viral attention, finally looked up and noticed Karen's change in demeanor. He saw her sitting quietly, her earlier sharpness softened, and he realized that the confrontation might finally be ending for good. Meanwhile, online, the story continued to spread. News outlets picked up the clip, discussing it as an example of everyday conflicts in public spaces and the power of remaining calm. People related to Alex's situation, recalling similar moments where patience had helped them navigate difficult encounters. The story resonated, not just as a humorous video, but as a reminder of human values like fairness, dignity, and composure. The flight attendant moved through the aisle again, offering drinks and snacks. Alex accepted a small bottle of water, sipping it slowly while continuing to reflect on the events. He realized how unexpected moments could carry life lessons. The confrontation over a window seat had transformed into something meaningful, not just for him but potentially for thousands of strangers across the world. Karen, still seated quietly, occasionally glanced at the window, as if trying to escape the reality of her viral fame. She had not anticipated the attention her behavior would receive, and the comments online made her feel exposed. Alex noticed her quiet demeanor but chose to focus on his own thoughts and reflections. He had learned that sometimes, the best way to respond to tension was not with anger, but with patience and self-respect. As the hours passed, more people online continued to discuss the video. Teachers, office workers, and students alike shared their own experiences of standing firm in polite ways. Alex's calm behavior became a talking point in articles, blogs, and social media discussions. People praised his ability to handle stress with dignity, turning a minor conflict into a lesson for all. Inside the plane, Alex finally opened his book again, feeling the gentle hum of the engines and the soft sway of the aircraft. He was beginning to relax fully, the viral attention outside the plane a distant thought. He reflected on how moments of patience, small acts of kindness, and quiet courage could ripple outward, affecting people in ways he had never imagined. Karen, meanwhile, seemed lost in her own thoughts. The initial frustration that had driven her behavior had given way to quiet reflection. She glanced at Alex once, her expression unreadable, and then returned to looking out her own window. It was a subtle acknowledgement, not spoken in words, but enough for Alex to sense a shift in energy. The plane continued its steady journey, and Alex felt a mixture of excitement and peace. He knew that this trip, which had begun with a simple flight and a small conflict, had already become memorable for reasons far beyond his expectations. The viral video, unbeknownst to him, had turned him into a symbol of calm and dignity. As evening approached, the sun dipped closer to the horizon, casting golden light across the clouds. Alex leaned back in his seat, enjoying the view. He felt a deep sense of gratitude not just for the opportunity to travel, but for the lessons learned during the flight. Moments of tension could be transformed into opportunities for growth, reflection, and inspiration, he realized. Sarah, seated a few rows ahead, smiled quietly at Alex. She had sensed the subtle changes in the cabin and was pleased that her small act of speaking up had made a difference. Alex, noticing her smile, returned a gentle nod, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude. Sometimes, he thought, small gestures had the power to shift the course of events in ways larger than expected. Karen, in her quiet reflection, seemed to accept the reality of the situation. She had been caught in a minor confrontation that had grown far larger than expected, and she could sense the online attention, even if she did not check her phone again. The tension that had defined the early hours of the flight was dissipating, replaced by a quiet understanding that sometimes, insisting on what one wants could have consequences beyond the immediate moment. Meanwhile, online, Alex's story continued to gain attention. People shared it widely, commenting on the importance of patience, fairness, and polite courage. Memes and short clips highlighted humorous moments, while thoughtful posts reflected on the deeper lessons. Alex, oblivious to the growing fame, was simply living in the moment, writing in his notebook and enjoying the flight. By the time the plane approached its destination, Karen had stopped attempting to engage with Alex at all. She leaned back in her seat, gazing quietly out the window, a subtle sense of reflection in her posture. Alex, meanwhile, felt a growing anticipation for the adventures awaiting him at his destination. The flight had begun with tension and frustration, but it had transformed into an unexpected lesson in patience, kindness, and human interaction. Alex reflected on how even small challenges could carry lessons for life, teaching resilience, calm, and dignity. As the plane descended, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, preparing for landing. Alex looked out at the horizon, watching as the city below began to take shape. He felt a quiet sense of triumph not because he had won an argument, but because he had maintained his composure and learned something valuable along the way. And though the viral attention online had begun to spread, Alex knew that the real lesson of the flight was not in fame, but in the quiet courage and patience that had carried him through a tense moment. For Alex, this flight had become more than a journey to a new city. It had become a story of calm, resilience, and human kindness, a story that would stay with him long after the plane landed. The plane began its slow descent, gliding through the soft clouds as the city below came into view. The golden light of the late afternoon sun reflected off the buildings and streets, creating a warm, inviting glow. Alex leaned back in his window seat, feeling a sense of calm he had not experienced since boarding. The earlier tension with Karen seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by reflection and quiet anticipation for the adventures that awaited him at his destination. Around him, passengers adjusted their seats, prepared for landing. Children fidgeted with excitement, couples whispered softly, and the occasional click of seat belt buckles filled the cabin. Alex noticed Karen sitting a few rows behind him, her posture relaxed compared to the sharp, tense way she had carried herself earlier. She gazed out her window quietly, as if lost in thought, perhaps reconsidering her actions. Alex reflected on the journey. What had started as a simple desire to enjoy a window seat had turned into a lesson he would carry with him long after the flight ended. He realized that life often presents small conflicts that test patience, calm, and fairness. In those moments, it is not anger or insistence that leads to a resolution, but dignity, polite courage, and sometimes, the support of others willing to speak up for what is right. He thought about Sarah, the passenger who had intervened in his favor. Her timely words had changed the course of the confrontation, reminding him that human kindness and courage can have a profound impact, even in small ways. Alex felt gratitude toward her, not just for defending him, but for showing that one person's voice can make a difference. Meanwhile, Karen's expression suggested she had also learned something. While she did not speak to Alex directly, there was a subtle acknowledgement in the way she leaned back in her seat, a quiet reflection on her earlier behavior. Alex chose not to dwell on anger or resentment. He understood that everyone has moments of frustration, and sometimes, those moments are opportunities for growth rather than conflict. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane approached the runway. The engines hummed steadily, and passengers held their breaths lightly in anticipation of landing. Alex took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and relief. He had navigated the situation calmly, and now he was about to step off the plane and begin the next chapter of his journey. As the wheels touched down smoothly on the runway, a soft cheer of relief and applause echoed in the cabin. Children clapped, and a few passengers smiled at one another, sharing a quiet sense of accomplishment at a safe landing. Alex smiled softly, feeling the weight of tension lift completely. He glanced around, observing the other passengers. Each person seemed absorbed in their own thoughts, yet there was a subtle sense of shared experience, the understanding that travel, even with its small conflicts, connects people in unexpected ways. Once the plane came to a complete stop, the flight attendants moved efficiently down the aisle, reminding passengers to stay seated until it was safe to disembark. Alex watched as Karen gathered her belongings. She moved with quiet deliberation, her expression calm and thoughtful. He realized that this simple act of patience, waiting and reflecting, was perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. When it was finally his turn to leave the plane, Alex unbuckled his seat belt and stood, stretching lightly. He carried his small backpack and notebook, feeling a sense of readiness for the adventures ahead. As he walked past Karen's row, he offered a small, polite nod. Karen looked up briefly, her lips pressing into a thin, reflective line. She returned the nod, subtle but meaningful. It was not a gesture of friendliness, nor of apology. It was simply an acknowledgement of shared humanity, of a moment that had challenged both of them and taught something important. Alex stepped into the bright light of the airport terminal, the hum of travelers and rolling luggage greeting him. He paused for a moment, taking in the sights and sounds of a new city. The anticipation of exploring unfamiliar streets, discovering new restaurants, and meeting new people filled him with excitement. Yet, he carried with him the lessons from the flight, the value of calm, fairness, and patience in every interaction. As he made his way through the terminal, Alex's phone buzzed. Curious, he glanced at it and saw notifications from social media. At first, he was puzzled, then surprised as he realized the video from the flight had gone viral. Messages poured in from friends, family, and strangers alike, praising his calm behavior and discussing the lesson of the window seat conflict. Alex felt a mix of amusement and gratitude. He had never expected a simple flight to reach so many people, yet the attention was not unpleasant. It reminded him that small acts of composure and dignity can resonate far beyond the immediate moment. Alex read through a few comments. People praised him for staying calm, for standing firm politely, and for not letting frustration turn into anger. Some shared their own stories of small conflicts in public spaces and how patience had helped them navigate difficult situations. Others made light-hearted jokes about the window seat, laughing at the drama that had unfolded on the plane. He smiled quietly, realizing that the situation had grown into something larger than he had imagined. The flight had become more than a trip from one city to another. It had become a story of human behavior, reflection, and unexpected kindness. Meanwhile, Karen had likely seen the video too. Alex imagined her scrolling through the comments, perhaps feeling a mix of embarrassment and reflection. He did not dwell on it. Instead, he chose to focus on the positive outcomes, the lessons he had learned, the support he had received, and the sense of calm that had carried him through the flight. As he collected his luggage and stepped toward the exit of the terminal, Alex thought about the people he had met on the plane. Sarah, who had spoken up at the right moment, had reminded him that small acts of courage could make a big difference. Jason, the young man who had recorded the video, had inadvertently turned a minor conflict into a story that inspired thousands. Even Karen, though initially difficult, had been part of a situation that ultimately highlighted the value of patience and composure. Outside the terminal, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the streets. Alex breathed in the fresh air, feeling a sense of freedom and possibility. The trip was just beginning, yet he already felt that he had gained something far more valuable than sightseeing or photographs. He had learned lessons about human behavior, respect, and the quiet power of standing firm with dignity. As he walked toward the taxi stand, Alex reflected on the nature of conflicts and human interactions. He realized that life often presented challenges that seemed small but carried important lessons. The window seat had been just a minor inconvenience, yet it had taught him patience, composure, and the importance of acting fairly. These were lessons that extended far beyond a single flight. Alex arrived at the taxi stand and climbed into a cab, giving the driver his destination. As the city streets passed by, he gazed out the window at the lights beginning to twinkle. People hurried along the sidewalks, engaged in their own lives, each facing their own challenges and small victories. Alex thought about how small acts of kindness, courage, and patience could ripple outward, affecting people in ways they might never know. He opened his notebook once more, jotting down reflections from the flight and the lessons learned. He wrote about fairness, about standing firm politely, and about the quiet satisfaction that comes from handling conflicts with dignity. Each word seemed to solidify the experience, transforming it from a stressful moment into a meaningful memory. Alex realized that life's most memorable lessons often came in unexpected forms. A simple flight, a disagreement over a window seat, and a few small acts of support had created a story that would stay with him for years. He smiled, thinking about how ordinary moments could become extraordinary when approached with patience, reflection, and respect. As the cab navigated through the city, Alex felt a deep sense of gratitude. He was grateful for the calm he had maintained, for the support he had received, and for the chance to reflect on human behavior in a meaningful way. The flight had been more than a journey from one place to another. It had been a journey of growth, understanding, and insight. By the time the cab reached his hotel, the city lights shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the streets. Alex paid the driver and stepped out, taking a deep breath. He felt a sense of readiness for whatever adventures awaited him. The day's events had reminded him that even in moments of tension, there was an opportunity to learn, grow, and act with dignity. As he checked into his room and looked out at the city from the window, Alex thought once more about the flight. He remembered Karen's initial demands, the tension that had filled the cabin, and the small but significant acts of kindness that had shifted the atmosphere. He realized that life's challenges, no matter how minor they may seem, carry lessons for those willing to observe and reflect. Alex placed his notebook on the desk, feeling a sense of completion. The flight had ended, but the lessons he had learned would remain with him. He had navigated a conflict with patience and composure, received support when needed, and discovered the subtle power of human kindness. The window seat, once a point of contention, had become a symbol of calm, dignity, and thoughtful action. As the evening grew darker, Alex settled into his room, reflecting on the day. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not for winning an argument, but for maintaining integrity and learning from the experience. The journey ahead promised new sights, sounds, and adventures, yet he carried with him the wisdom gained from a single flight, a simple window seat, and the unexpected people who had influenced the experience. Alex smiled softly, realizing that every journey, no matter how ordinary, held the potential for insight, reflection, and growth. And as he prepared for sleep, he knew that the lessons learned today about patience, fairness, and quiet courage would stay with him forever. The flight had ended, but the story, and the lessons it carried, were far from over.